Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nigel Cornwall of New Anglia Energy. I'm chairing this panel session, which is called Liberty Innovation Hub, part of Housing 2020. The title of this session is NetZero Collective, working together to meet the challenges of decarbonising UK homes. A very, very significant challenge. Domestic emissions made up about 15% of total emissions in 2018, and that's up from 10% in 1990. So we're heading in the wrong direction. Last year, the Climate Change Committee has advised that basically the entire domestic sector needs to be decarbonised if we're to hit the net zero target. So a huge challenge, which I think has been calculated as converting one property every second for each of the 30 years between now and 2050. So a big challenge. Against this background, NetZero Collective was launched last week, now has a live website, and basically it is looking to deliver the transformation that will allow domestic energy efficiency to thrive in the built environment. We're going to look at the work of the collective and its work programme today, and we have three people very closely involved in the project, which is really looking at identifying a methodology and a process for rollout of packaged, understandable and costed solutions to retrofitting homes. So we have three speakers for you. Alan Wilson, who will be first off, Business Development Director of NetZero Collective. He will be followed by Professor Abu Bakir Bahaj, who's Head of Energy and Climate Change Group Division at University of Southampton. And thirdly, we have Andrew Waggett from Portsmouth City Council, who are one of the first off participants in the project. So I will be handing over to our three speakers to speak for between 5 to 10 minutes apiece. And then we will follow that with a question and answer session. You will see on your screen on the bottom right, if your screen looks like mine, an icon which allows you to post questions. It is not an open mic session. I will look at the questions as we go through the presentation and then try and make sure we cover all the key issues in the Q&A session. So on that note, I will hand over to Alan Wilson.
Hello and good afternoon, and thank you for not just the panelists for giving of their time, but those of you who are participating with your ears and hopefully with some really good questions. So thank you for the introduction, Nigel. As Nigel said, I'm the Business Development Director of NetZero Collective, a new organisation that's been developed to work with a lot of other organisations to try and answer some questions to help develop a strategy that will deliver carbon reduction through domestic properties. So you'll be delighted to know I've got 63 slides to get through in 7 minutes. Made Nigel, the chair, a little bit concerned. I tell a lie.
Absolutely.
So in terms of the idea is that we wanted to create a club of those people who have properties, those people who have a great deal of intelligence. I'm looking at my panelists here for that contribution. But to answer the question in terms of, we haven't got an awful lot of time, how do we actually go about doing this? But we wanted to do it in a way that gave us a data-led approach. I know a lot of people in the social sector and indeed the private sector have installed installed solar panels. Some will have done batteries, some will have done air source heat pumps, but we really want to know how we go about decarbonising homes at scale. So in order to do this, we've created an organisation called NetZero Collective. We're pleased to say that to date, we've got 18 housing associations and councils engaged in contributing properties and funds to have those properties retrofitted. But we wanted to do it in a manner that was going to be meaningful and useful when we're starting to look at the other properties that we need to do, hence the engagement with our partners, Southampton University. So we've one other issue that we need to address. Once we know what we need to do to a particular property, who's going to do it? Because at the moment, we've got a significant shortfall in terms of the people capable to actually do this. So the aim's fairly simple. What are the costs? What are the benefits of decarbonising properties? But again, looking very much at our colleagues at Southampton University who specialise in this, is we want to understand in a pragmatic way, how do we do it properly? We all proponents of a fabric first approach. We need to make sure that the decarbonisation of properties means that energy is still affordable to some of the most vulnerable people in society. So how do we actually go about that? What investment do we need to make in renewable technologies to make this sustainable? And so part of our approach is to take 200, 300 properties across the UK. We currently have about 160 properties pledged, different archetypes. Those properties will undergo a detailed survey methodology that was developed with Bakker and his team. The result of that and monitoring equipment in those properties to capture those delightful indicators of temperature, humidity, and energy consumption. That will then help for each property interventions to be developed specifically for that property, involving insulation, ventilation, energy generation, energy storage, energy conservation, covering not just the heat and the hot water element, but critically the cooling element. Some of you will have had the experience of super insulating properties that then result in us creating, as one asset management director told me last week, we've been building ovens for the last 6 years. So we've these dual dilemmas to deal with. So properties are surveyed, loggers installed, interventions specified. Through NetZero Collective, those interventions are fulfilled on an open book basis because we want everybody to understand the costs of this. And critically understanding what the carbon cost is of the equipment that we're actually putting into these properties, be it PV, batteries, air source heat pumps. We want to know the net impact of trying to reduce carbon emissions. So those are the aims, our membership. We're fortunate that we've got a starting position with certainly 18 social landlords. We've also got a significant private sector landlord also involved to help give us this start. Properties that we can then effectively set up as laboratories across the country. And a little bit like the television program 7 Up, we just want these properties to be run as little laboratories for an awfully long time so we can truly understand how the tech is actually performing, how the emissions are performing, how people behave in these properties, but then also to look at the introduction of new innovations and have solid data from which we can judge their performance. So we've a number of partners, University of Southampton, Inquiring Minds. We've also got Zero Carbon Futures, who are affiliate to Nissan Motor Company, understanding the interaction between a house. If we're looking at energy generation and storage, then we're being told that electric vehicles are the way to go. Well, in Japan, they view the total carbon footprint of the individual in terms of the property and their transportation. A battery in a car, can we use that to help power a house? Absolutely is the answer. We've got renewable manufacturers, the supply chain, very keen to understand their role. We're very keen to understand what they can commit to this. Interestingly, we have had to inform them that we haven't specifically mentioned Volkswagen and diesel emissions, but those of you that have had discussions with people that are trying to sell things like air source heat pumps, they will trot out some great statistics. We have told people that at Southampton University, we will actually be looking at, in a very scientific way, are they fulfilling what they're promising? I'm not going to steal Bacchus' thunder by saying that a study that looked at 1 unit in and 4 units out, which is the often quoted conversion rate for an air source heat pump in order to make it affordable, is perhaps not at the order of 1 unit in and 4 units out. And then on the employment and education from perspective, we've got at the moment a situation with COVID-19. COVID-19 is a fairly significant global threat. I would have to say that it pales into insignificance when you compare it to the impact of climate change. And that is our big problem, is time. What it has created is the opportunity for us to look at creating the capacity to deliver retrofit at scale through actually employing people in the local area that we have stock, that we have properties, employing people in the Crawley area who have suffered with the loss of Gatwick. There's many skilled people who used to be aircraft technicians who are now going through Crawley College to look at retraining. These are individuals with extremely high levels of skill that can be put to good use in terms of delivery against the housing stock, not just the social housing stock. So the approach I've mentioned, I'm not going to reiterate what I've already said, but it's a data-led approach to determine if we have, if Backer and his team specify that XYZ interventions, which may be ventilation, insulation, energy generation, energy conservation. If there's a number of interventions that are specified, then there is a model that said that with these specifications at this particular cost, then there'll be a reduction in carbon emissions. Then critically, what we have to ask is, once we've done the work, what's been the result? What's been the impact on carbon emissions? What's been the impact on the quality of the life of people living in those properties? And one of the things that I say that often gets me into a bit of hot water is that one of the things that we've benefited from and the planet has suffered from since the start of the Industrial Revolution is the fact that carbon has been far too cheap. And as a result, we've spent energy and carbon fairly irresponsibly. Hindsight is a great thing. So the outputs, well, one of the things that we want to do is be able to help form governmental policy on the direction of travel, what needs to be done. We'll also, through our partners at Southampton University, be able to develop a model. The vision is to enable an asset manager to upload their stock, their portfolio of properties, through a model to then provide at a individual asset level what interventions are required to reduce the carbon emissions, by what level and at what cost. So aggregate that data, you have a carbon strategy informed by data. We want to create a blueprint for the development of centres of excellence for decarbonisation. This is a little bit of a shout out to the audience. Sound like a terrible 1980s DJ there. Andrew's smiling, he knows what I mean. Insofar as we've got 6 organisations, 6 local authorities at the moment that have said that they would like to look at how we go about creating a centre of excellence for decarbonisation. What do I mean by that? I mean a partnership between those that own the housing stock, the local authority, and the colleges, and NetZero Collective to look at how do we actually go about taking people from the local area, recruiting them, and employing them once trained to decarbonise properties within the local area, be it private or be it social. And I know that it's something that we're very early days discussion with Portsmouth City Council and with Crawley Borough Council and 4 others. We don't know what the answer is. The whole idea of the collective is that we develop the best answer through working together. That is something I'm personally very excited about. It's something that the Nissan Motor Company started in Gateshead some 27 years ago, and have trained a phenomenal number of people from the local area, 96% of whom have come from the ranks of the unemployed. So we want to deliver a good understanding of how do we do it, what's the methodology, what are the pitfalls, what are the costs, all of the questions that those of you that sit on boards or indeed answer to boards, the questions that the boards would answer. And we want to be able to deliver these answers within about 18 months because we've not got long. The most significant problem that we've got is the lack of time. Daily stories in the news, we have to be able to move quick. And one of the things that we want to do within NetZero is take action on the understanding that if we are clever and we talk to the right people, we'll get it right 60, 70% of the time. We'll learn from the bits that we don't, but we are actually starting to do something. So that is what we aim to actually achieve. And that is where I shall conclude.
Thank you, Alan. We've got a couple of questions already posted. One of them I'll pick up later. There is one here which is more an issue of clarification, which is how does your work programme fit with the PAS 2035 whole house approach? Could you briefly answer that one?
I can. It's a good question. It sits at the core. It's a fab approach. Part of the methodology that we've developed with Backer and team has taken the PAS 2035 methodology, and that's actually been incorporated into the process. So it's a fully holistic approach to looking at what we're doing. And I would say also looking at the neighbourhood, so it's not just necessarily looking at individual properties in isolation, it's gathering all of that information. Okay. So I hope that's answered the question.
I think it has. Yep. Thank you, Alan. We're now going to move on to Professor Bakir, who's going to talk about the research programme underpinning this being carried out at University of Southampton.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great. Thanks very much for the introduction. So I have been already introduced. And just to say quickly that what my division is doing in relation to energy and cities and how cities could contribute to the energy emission targets, both at the city level, local authority level, and also at the national level. So this is basically what we do at the Energy and Climate Change Division. And we do quite a lot on renewable energy, energy access, especially in around countries in Africa, the Far East. We do a lot of work on cities and infrastructure. We look at buildings and communities, and we also look at behavior modeling, and also at climate and emissions. And I hope today I will give you a quick indication about what we have, what the policy require us to do, and secondly, what we have been doing to address that. So I'll start by the policy aspect. I need to get this thing out from my screen. Okay, so I wonder if you see that or not. So energy and climate change. So I think most of you know this guy. This is the ex-governor of the Bank of England, Carney, and just to indicate why would the Bank of England be interested in energy and climate change. And this is the proposition he made just 3 months, 2.5 months before the climate change, before the Paris Accord rather, in Paris in 2015. And what he's saying is that currently there are a lot of companies that are really involved in the fossil fuel area, where we know that the resources are about 1,500 gigatons of carbon, which are in the ground. And if you go for 2 degrees centigrade, remember this is pre-net zero and also pre-Paris, 2 degrees centigrade, that about 15% or 225 of those gigatons of carbon can be utilized. What does that mean? It means a lot for us in terms of our exploration of fossil fuels, and also it means a lot to us as people who have investment in these companies. For example, my pension and your pension is invested in these companies. So if they're going to be isolated by policy because the resources that are fossil fuel are in the ground, they need to think of another business model. And that's why Mark Carney is actually after them and trying to get them to look at assessment of the climate change policy as part of the annual reporting. So it's really important in terms for finances as well as the environment. So looking at the UK as a whole in terms of primary energy, and this is the chart that people show. This is for 2016. I have not updated it, and it just indicates to you where are the inputs in here, where are the outputs. And you can see here the final consumption, and this is how much we waste, about 28%. And this is how much in input from renewables. And if you look at what's happening to the grid now, this is this May, 25th of May. You can see that the top producer of electricity in May is wind energy. And if you do selective areas, you can see even solar is producing a lot of energy for us, or a lot of electricity for us. And you can see by 2019, about 37% of our electricity being produced from renewables. And that's really beating the target of 30% by 2020. So we're doing quite a lot in relation to energy generation, and also how we're going to make it through renewables. But we're not doing very much in relation to buildings. So in terms of international targets, so this is what the Climate Change Act did in 2008, far beyond anybody who is now thinking about the Paris Agreement. 2008, a long time ago, 80% reduction from 1990 by 2050. And I'll talk about how this is going to be achieved. This is the Climate Change Committee, and these are done in terms of carbon budgets. And you can see that in here, the last carbon budget that was agreed 2016, our emission reduction will be reduced, or the emissions will be reduced by 57%. Okay, so this is really what's happening in relation to the Climate Change Act. And then we got the Paris Accord, which I'll possibly talk about that in a minute. So what does that mean? It means that by 2030, we need to have about 150 terawatt hours of electricity coming out from low carbon. And the government indicates that this will come by about 50 gigawatt, basically from wind, solar PV, and maybe perhaps marine energy, which I'm also an active researcher in. So if you put on top of that the Paris Accord, 1.5 degrees centigrade, there's a huge things to be achieved in the next 30 years. So we have also in 2019 changed the whole game for everybody else around the world. We are the first in the UK out of the G7 nations to actually say we're going to be net zero by 2050. And that has a lot of implications to how we live, how we communicate, and how we also travel. And that means that this curve here, rather than 80%, will be about zero. So, and here are the targets again, basically net zero by 2050. So where is the consumption? So this is the work that we've done in relation to where consumptions are around in the UK. And you can see, if you're looking at both domestic and non-domestic buildings, cities rather, you can see that the consumption here, about 76% of that is falling in the urban environment. And this is where we really need to get the action happening. And that's why we have the NetZero Collective taking that as a torch to go ahead with it. So cities and energy are really quite interlinked. In relation to cities, they're really occupying very small amount of the land surface in the world, about 2%, but they account for half the population, which will be about 60% by 2050. 2/3 of the energy, or more in fact, the energy is actually consumed in cities, and 76% of the emissions is done in cities. So cities are really critical in delivery of our targets. Also, cities are important because they can provide leadership both at the national, regional, international levels to allow us to achieve the targets. And then there is also the wealth within those cities, the innovations through universities and colleges and so forth. And also there is a large-scale infrastructure, for example, buildings, that you could deploy system at scale. So that's really the pinning point for where I think why we need to look at buildings and also cities. So based on that, we have done a lot of work in relation to our buildings. So if you look at a building, you can see this is a typical semi-detached or detached building. You can have a lot of aspect of how you can provide energy for it. You can have a wind turbine. If the resource is high, you can have PV, you can have ground source, air source heat pump. And you can see this is done 13 years ago, so you've done all the work around this. And also for larger scale buildings, you can see that you can integrate photovoltaics either on the roof or bolt-on system, either in sky lights or atria and so forth. So this is really something that photovoltaic could afford to do because it's modular and could be integrated in facades of building. That's only for power generation, but you can think about heat as well, but not from PV, but also from other technologies. And these are examples of the buildings that we have in Southampton. So if you happen to be in Southampton, please to have a look around in our buildings. And this is something that we have delivered and actually piloted and produced as a tile in here. But this building here, I will talk about right at the end. So what we have done is we looked at all the buildings. So we mapped all the buildings in Southampton, both in industrial as well as domestic buildings, looking at the orientation, also the areas around the roofs and so on, to allow us to understand how we can produce in terms of power around from these buildings. So that required us to understand the solar radiation. So this is the map of the solar radiation for Southampton. You can see the level of radiation in terms of annual. If anybody is supporting Southampton football ground, so this is the football ground in Southampton, and you can see some of the storage tanks in there. You can see the level of irradiance varying around those. So we map this every 20 minutes across the city to give us what will be the solar radiation and hence the solar potential of 1 meter square of all the buildings or any building in Southampton. So whether it's a tower block or also small scale building. So what did that tell us in terms of having electricity in cities at scale? So here are the results. Okay, as you know, buildings have got smaller roofs and larger roofs and so forth. So you have we have to quantify in terms of the sizes of the roof that you can put in a building. For example, smaller buildings will have smaller scale PV, 3 kilowatts or less. And you can see the domestic are the majority, non-domestic are the minority. And if you go again to the large scale, you can see it's the non-domestic. You can have quite a lot of available area to do PV. What's interesting is how much energy is that producing. And I can say that the modeling says that Southampton will give you about 260 megawatt of PV available for the whole year. Of course, not continuously, but varying with the sunlight. And the amount of energy that this could produce is about 247 gigawatt hours. So when I did the presentation for the council, I showed them that in terms of the buildings, you can actually have about 25% coming out over the year, coming out from the roofs of buildings. And they really got interested in this, and they tried to have a program on that. And actually they are still progressing with it, but at a larger scale. So you can see cities can actually deliver through photovoltaics to start with some aspect of the power requirement. Obviously it is varying over the day and over the year. And then if you have already defined the buildings in the city, you can do other stuff with it. You can do, for example, interventions like roof insulation, floor insulation, window upgrade, wall insulation, and so forth. And you can do the analysis, which is validated, to allow you to indicate how much is the hard interventions can give you in terms of energy saving and emissions. So this is coming technology, hard interventions give you that. You can look at also at well-being, behavior, attitudes, and acceptability, also cost, economics, and that gives you an indication what the soft measures could also produce in terms of reduction in emissions from the city. And also you can have an implemented environmental policy or a driver. For example, Southampton City now got the Green City Charter, which we are working on with them around that, and that will give you another indication what the policy implications could produce for you. So that gives you an indication from a whole city, but based on a square meter of a building, to allow you to do the modeling and come up with some results.
A couple of minutes, please.
Okay, so, and finally, actually more than a couple of minutes, and finally, so this is the building that I mentioned to you. So this is 2004, done in Havant. It's not too far away from Portsmouth. And this really indicates to us, so this is 11 houses that we done, paid for by the government, PV and solar thermal, highly insulated buildings. This is what we are aspiring to do. But you can see that we need to do something to do at the individual level, which is the behavior. So here is what the photovoltaics produces in terms of electricity. And this is where the what we export to the grid. You can see most of it is exported to the grid, where the consumption profile is here. So if we shift that consumption profile into the middle by behavior change, you can see that this householder could reduce quite a lot of their energy. So I'll finish by asking a few questions. So what if scalable, sustainable energy systems are implemented everywhere and becomes our part of the energy mix in cities? So we can build on the COVID-19 reductions and so forth by transition ourselves from fossil fuels to renewables. And if you look at our campus in here, so we're looking at that now in real terms. How can we reduce the footprint of the university? So we're looking at each and every building. We can look at that in terms of integrated PV as well as district heating and so forth around universities, schools and citywide. And what else if we can also try and link photovoltaics to energy storage. So this is the demand from about 4,000 households that we monitored in the Solent region. You can see that the peak in here, electricity peak. So if all those PVs in the households are actually equipped with storage, you can see how much you can shave that high peak for the UK.
Good.
You think about the electrification of transportation and so forth, and we need to think about how the government could allow us to develop this by having mechanisms to support this, and the universities could be the spark for that, and the science base perhaps could be the people who actually provide the evidence, as Alan said, to influence policy. So we should really work together to make it all happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to say thanks to my team as well. So they are in the picture from last Christmas. I don't know whether we're going to do that this Christmas.
I doubt it somehow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We need to press on. Our third speaker is Andrew Waggett from Portsmouth City Council. He's going to explain what a leading local authority is looking to take out of this exciting project. Over to you.
Hi everybody. I was aware of how much time I'd be given by Bakker and Alan, so I promise I will whiz through this very quickly. So I think Bakker's done a good job of setting the scene from a sort of national context. I think what I'm going to do is talk more about the localisation of the scheme and what it looks like from a city council's point of view and an RSL's point of view as well. So. Hello from a broom cupboard in Hampshire. I'm the Energy Services Team Manager at Portsmouth City Council. My team looks after a whole multitude of sins underneath that title, but part of what we look at is domestic energy efficiency and retrofitting domestic properties. Now, previously, we've always had an emphasis on work that we do in the non-domestic space, being the place where we earn the money, and then with the money that we do earn or save, we invest that into staff and resources to treat fuel poverty mitigation. But increasingly, over the last year and a half, we've also got this increasing emphasis on carbon mitigation, and I think that's probably common across all councils that we speak to. So although I'm going to talk about a council context and the Portsmouth context, it's not necessarily unique to Portsmouth City Council. So just a quick brief on Portsmouth. I think most people will be aware of where Portsmouth is. It has the advantage of being pretty easily identifiable on a map. It's the most densely populated city in the UK outside of central London. So there are 90,000 homes, more or less, crammed onto quite a small island. Just about an island, and within that is a whole mishmash of properties, which probably represents quite representative of the UK. The places where that perhaps changes is that Portsmouth City Council has a lot of systems built properties. There was quite a lot of Luftwaffe planning went on in the 1940s, so the response to that was to put up houses very, very quickly using systems built properties. And so Portsmouth City Council owns around 14,500, 15,000 social houses. Around about a quarter of those are systems built in some ways. So that, again, that systems built covers a whole multitude of sins, but in the worst cases of that, that's concrete slab and concrete panel and steel frame. So about as bad thermodynamically as you're possibly going to get. Like a lot of other local authorities in the UK, Portsmouth City Council announced a climate emergency, or declared a climate emergency, I should say, in March 2019. That obligates the city, not just the council's portfolio of buildings and portfolio generally, but obligates the city to go to net zero carbon for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions by 2030. And then the note on the bottom there is just to say that Portsmouth City Council is a unitary authority, so effectively we have responsibility for everything. We're not one of these ones where we don't have responsibility for roads and buildings and what have you. So like most registered social landlords, we have experience of retrofitting. The easy measures really are done. You know, we've done the cavity wall insulation, we've done the loft insulation. Virtually all of our homes are on combi boilers. We have, of the 14,500 properties, we have 13,500 that have combi boilers, and those that aren't on combi boilers are on district heating of some kind. And again, a whole multitude of sins there, but that's the big residual carbon that we're going to have to get rid of. Again, I know this is a national issue. Decarbonisation of heat is the thing. Retrofitting has been done in waves traditionally, so we've done certain CEST and warm front and Eco 1, Eco 2, Eco 3, but it tends to just treat a specific measure at a specific point in time. The retrofitting, unfortunately, it looks like GHG and LADs are going to be the same as this. But one of the issues of those pots of funding is that they tend to not to incentivise deep retrofit, and perhaps that's one of the challenges that we can talk about. We have been responsible for one of the largest benefit, I think the largest benefit project in Europe, which for the uninitiated among you is kind of the a passive house retrofit, if you like, to 15 kilowatt hours of heating per metre squared per annum. that's good, and it gets you close to net zero carbon. But in doing so, that project was over £10 million. So we spent £100,000 on each of those flats to get them from a 1960s Rima built concrete block of flats down to something that you could effectively heat with a candle. But that's not really repeatable across 14,500 properties as things stand.
A couple of minutes, Andrew, please.
Just a note there to say that whenever we've done one of these deep retrofits or done a retrofitting measure in domestic properties, we've utilised the work that Bakker and his team can provide to give us quantification and validation of the savings, emission savings, and benefit that the projects can bring. Although sometimes those benefits and quantification is not quite what perhaps the grant funders want to hear in the first place. So, quick back of a fact packet approximation of what the scale of the challenge is in Portsmouth, just to retrofit our social housing in net zero carbon. You're talking somewhere between £500 million and £1 billion. Now, clearly, this is undoable if we're going to try and keep the water out of those properties at the same time. Those costs need to fall significantly and quickly if we're going to be achievable. Part of the problem is that we just don't even know the quantum or the scale of what we've got to do, and we haven't got a well enough developed programme to take it from the current situation to net zero carbon in 2030, and that's perhaps something that we'll look at in net zero carbon. Even if we had £1 billion to spend tomorrow, there just simply aren't enough jobs in the supply chain to be able to deal with the scale of the challenge. And then just a couple of notes on the bottom there, talk about occupancy behaviour. You know, even if the COPs of a heat and SLC pump were 4 to 1, you're still possibly putting people in problems if you just put SLC pumps across the estate without treating the fabric. And occupancy behaviour is obviously something that engineers and building businesses fret about, but is unavoidable. So, Alan covered a lot of this. So, what the NetZero Collective for us was going to do is recognise and identify the quantum of the challenge, and also what needs to be done in the programme and timeframes under which that needs to be done. It's going to help to train that local workforce and keep things local. And it's hopefully going to use the social housing. I saw a question come up, so I'll answer that question effectively on that point. The social housing, I hope, will act as a critical mass from which we can build a private home offer around. And fundamentally, the bottom line is that we'll get to net zero carbon more quickly by being part of this than by not having a project of similar size.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you to all our 3 speakers. We've got a little bit of time left. A couple of questions have come up in the course of the presentations about how you take the learning from the social housing sector and drop it into the private sector where motivations and behaviours might be different. And I guess I'll ask Alan to pick that up. One question that I have is that it's really good to see early movers, particularly given the scale of the challenge, but how can these research findings be future-proofed given that very few people see time of use tariffs? And I guess that one would be mainly for Professor Bahaj, but any views from the panelists, please, on those issues? Alan.
I guess the picking up that first question, Nigel, we know that social housing stock, somewhere between 5 and 6 million dwellings within the UK, is a part of the total housing stock in the UK. And social housing has got the ability to move fairly rapidly. Culturally, it's more social minded than trying to gather together all of the individual private homeowners. And as Andrew touched on, it's looking at how in an area it's possible to start to raise awareness for individuals with their own homes in terms of what they can do and the benefits to them. The opportunity that it gives us is to effectively almost cross-subsidise the work that needs to be done in the socially owned sector using revenues from retrofitting properties in the private sector, but utilizing that centrally created workforce that's going to be required at scale in order to do that. Andrew and I have done a little bit of work on looking at the numbers of people involved if you were to look at retrofitting properties within the ownership of Southampton City Council. And you're looking at somewhere between 250 and 275 new specialist roles if you just wanted to look at those properties themselves. So the scale is significant. Without the workforce, we're not going to do it. Funding is going to be a key requisite. Likelihood is it will be a good old combination of those things that change our behaviours. So there'll be a taxation or a cost if you have a dirty carbon home, and likelihood is that there will be some of that magic money in the form of very cheap finance to help prime the pump and get things moving. Personally, we have to move quick because we haven't got an awful lot of time, I don't believe.
Okay.
Hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's a good answer. Professor Bahaj, smart metering, time of use tariffs, how important are they in stress testing the research?
Well, I think smart metering are very important in that it gives us an indication as to what the consumption in real terms, actually in half an hour, if possible. So those graphs that I showed you about the 4,000 homes, we had it at 10 seconds of data. It's quite a lot of data that we got from there. And by having that data, it allows you to look at what different loads are there in the house, whether you can, with intelligence, you can actually try to make it either come on when the PV is on, or having it come on at times when the electricity cost is lower. The time of use tariff is quite an interesting proposition. Andrew is now thinking about that, and I'm not really sure how quick this will come because you need to have the intelligence around that. But I think gradually it will come. I think universities could provide the solid, robust analysis to indicate what systems need to be in place so that at least you have the people who are with fuel power are not really marginalized by these technologies. And I think battery storage, with especially at scale that I mentioned, with time of use tariff, will make much more interest to local authorities in terms of also playing the market and getting some money in.
I think if I may, Nigel, as well,
yeah, Andrew.
Time of use tariffs, I think it's something that keeps me up at night a lot from a fuel poverty point of view, but also from a point of view of what the opportunity is to retrofit our social housing portfolio. Time of use tariffs, if not implemented alongside battery storage, are potentially disastrous fuel poverty wise. And I think that really that battery storage will almost be obligated to be used in conjunction with any of these carbon saving technologies from a social housing point of view.
Thank you. We've got one final question. Do I have time for that? Yeah, from Cheryl Scriven, which I think is quite fundamental, really. How do you take people along with you on this journey? Views from each of you, please.
That's a postcard.
So if I just start very, very quickly, it's very difficult. And I think with information technology, it may be possible to actually take people along with you. So in our department, for example, if you have something that flashes up to your screen to tell you, please, when you go home, close your window and turn your computer off. So based on information technology, then it is possible that you can actually get people with you. The hardest bit is getting the citizens that are not really involved with the local authorities. And that's really something that we really need to find a way around it. And that's why Southampton and Portsmouth City Council are having campaigns to talk to the citizens around the climate emergencies they have declared and the charters that they have declared. And that's really quite important to have an assembly for citizens in the cities around this agenda.
Thank you very much. That's a very good answer. Alan.
There you go. But if I unmute before starting speaking. I could be quite contentious. I have to agree with what Backer has said. The way that we will change people's behaviour will be partly through education. Time is increasingly short. If the price of a kilowatt of energy was £10 per kilowatt, people would be a lot more careful with how they use it. At the moment, it's almost like it's free issue. I appreciate not for everybody. We have some people that we know, and Backer and Andrew, and we've been involved in studies where people haven't been able to afford to heat their properties. So we have to be very careful with this. But until we see it as a matter of urgency, then people around the planet are going to really start suffering very severe consequences, which will have a knock-on effect. One of the things that, whilst I'm not on mute, I'll say, is that there's been a number of messages about which parts of the country that are we covering. NetZero Collective, we would like to double the number of properties that we've currently got in the site to get it 300 plus. Yes, I'm reading the signal from the chair to shut up, so I will.
Oh, no. Oh. You went mute.
Oh, sorry, at the wrong time. Yeah, I was merely saying that we would like to double the number of properties. We've currently got 160 properties committed. We would like to see that up to about 300, so that we can run a meaningful laboratory into the future that will enable us to determine how effective technology actually is and behaviour is at reducing carbon emissions. So open to people to join our happy, passionate band of organisations.
Okay, we're going to have to call it a day there. I'm getting quite clear instructions from the organisers that we've run our course. Thank you very much. This is tip of the iceberg stuff. It's a fascinating project. I'd love to engage with you more on it, and I'm sure our listeners would as well. So thank you very much, and good luck.